Welcome to this new series on YouTube. Lachlan 2612 Sports Channel here, and this new series we're going to be talking about is the AFL rivalries. Well, this has been inspired by Rugby League History's channel when he talked about the rivalries in the NRL. If you haven't subscribed, I would like to give a shout. Also, like to give a shout out to Rugby League History for inspiring me to do this video. He does lots of awesome content on the NRL. Go check out his channel if you haven't yet. Anyways, back into the video. Carlton versus the first rivalry we're going to be talking about is the traditional Carlton versus Collingwood rivalry. The first official game for the AFL Premiership points between the two teams was in round 7, 1897. It was a low-scoring game, that one. Collingwood won it 6-5-41 to 5-5-35. In the official first meeting between the two teams for Premiership points in the VFL. While the very first meeting came in 1892, Carlton had won the very first game against Collingwood. Given that Collingwood at the time were only a new team coming into the VFL. Before Collingwood came into the league. Most of the players that were aligned in this town were actually aligned with Carlton before Collingwood came into the competition. It was a rivalry that goes way back. According to Google Maps, Carlton and Collingwood is only a 6-minute drive between each other. The street that borders that is Brunswick Street. It's the street that borders between the Carlton and Collingwood border in Victoria. Out of it, let's go to the head-to-head. Carlton and Collingwood, they played each other 260 times. Carlton, it's a pretty even rivalry. Carlton have won 128. Collingwood have won 128. And there has been 4 draws between the two teams. With the first draw coming in round 1, 1914. And that was that moment where Dick Lee took that specky at Victoria Park. He had broken the ankle strap on his boot that time when he took the mark and kicked the goal with his bare foot. Many Carlton and Collingwood players at the time, they worked at the local brewery in Melbourne, where Collingwood's 8-time premiership coach Jock McHale worked as the foreman. The first grand final between the two was the 1910 grand final. The Blues had won 3 in a row. Collingwood were going for their first in 7 years. However, in that game, Percy Sheehan of Carlton and Jack Shorten of Collingwood, I don't know if he's related to Bill Shorten from the Labor Party, were given 18-month suspensions. While Jack Bakey from Carlton and Tom Baxter from Collingwood received 12-month suspensions. Baxter Richard Dakin claimed it was he who actually started the argument with Jack Bakey. It led to Richard Dakin getting a 12-month suspension after the 1910 Grand Final. Dakin had announced his retirement after Baxter was cleared. The Blues vowed they'll never forget that day, and they got their revenge in 1915. And beat the Pies in the first grand final, in probably what would be the first or second grand final of World War One. Every year since 1993, Carlton and Collingwood have played each other in the Peter Mac Cup. It was named after Sir Peter McCallum, the Scottish Australian-born oncologist. He was the founder of the Peter McCallum Cancer Centre in Melbourne. It's usually Collingwood home games, while Carlton home games is known as the Richard Pratt Cup. Anyways, back to the talking points of the rivalry. The 70s seem to be very hostile between the two teams. In 1970, Collingwood looked like they had the game wrapped up and looks set to end a 12-year drought after they hadn't won one since 1958. And then Ron Barassi made with his famous coaching spray at half-time, said that the Carlton players have to handball for their life, which the Blues got up to win by 10 points, with reserve Ted Hopkins kicking 5 goals in the grand final. And yet George Harris from Carlton said at that time, what was better than beating Collingwood by 10 goals? Beating them by 5 points. Then they take it on each other again in 1979, which the Blues got up by 5 points, thanks to Wayne Harbs setting up Ken Sheldon for the winning goal. And then Wayne Harbs did it again in 1981, when the two teams took on each other again in the grand final. The Blues got up by 20 points. The last time the two took it on each other in the finals was the 1988 qualifying final, which the Blues got up to win the Booker place in the second semi against Hawthorn, while Collingwood got eliminated the following week by Melbourne. However, the Pies would get sweet revenge 2 years later and won in 1990. However, in 1984, round 5, Warren Ralph was given a free kick and a chance to draw the game for Carlton at Waverley Park on Anzac Day 1984, in front of 68,000 people at Waverley Park. It was exactly 68,082 people at the ground watching the game. Warren Ralph missed that shot. The Pies won by 5 points. However, there are big goal of the year contenders in that game, in those matches. Mick Mcguan got goal of the year in 1994 in the second round. Even though Carlton started off pretty good in the first quarter, Collingwood came about and won the game from there. However, 12 years later in 2006, Eddie Betts got goal of the year after he smothered a handball in defence against Tarkin Lockyer to kick one of the goals of the year. However, Collingwood still went on to win the game. However, there was Carlton and Collingwood didn't just take on each other in home and away season rounds at the MCG or finals. They took on each other on New Year's Eve in 1999 on what would be the last game of the 20th century / the first game of the 21st century. However, that game would be remembered by a young 18-year-old spearhead by the name of Brendan Favola. Fav went on to kick 12 goals that night to give the Blues an 88-point win. In round 18 2000, Carlton and Collingwood would play out their games in the last suburban derby at Optus Oval. Blues fans are not disappointed that afternoon. They got about their business and won their 13th game in a row that time and won by 111 points. However, the Pies got revenge 2 years later against the same team, but this time Collingwood were playing for a top 4 spot. Carlton were playing to avoid the wooden spoon. Buckley played his 200th game that night for Collingwood and gave the Blues no mercy whatsoever. However, he would help give the Blues their first wooden spoon in that game. And that was the first wooden spoon that Carlton had actually won. To add insult to injury for Blues fans that night, Joffa, well, hang on, let's say name should not be mentioned, actually came to the MCG that night holding up a giant wooden spoon throughout the game. It was not good. That was not good at all for Blues fans. However, that was another great game between the two teams, even though they didn't make the finals that year. It was the last round of 2004. Collingwood started off strong in the first half against the Blues, but poor kicking kept the door open for Carlton. The Blues took the lead before Collingwood had a late charge. Despite having 4 more shots at goal, the Blues would win by a point. In the 2010s, the rivalry took a bit of a stir, whereas Mick Mcguan went to Carlton after finishing up as Collingwood coach. But he could not get the job done over his assistant Nathan Buckley, as he had a well-established Collingwood team at that point. Malthouse, he had a Blues team on the free fall. Anyways, let's go to the players who have represented both clubs. There have been a few that went to Carlton and Collingwood. Bill Strickland. He played for Carlton in the VFA between 1895 and 1896, then went to Collingwood for the very first VFL season in 1897. Les Abbott. He was a Collingwood player in 1904, and then he transferred to Carlton in 1905. Tom Clancy played for Carlton in 1910 from the 1910 to the 1914 seasons, before transferring to Collingwood in 1915, which they lost the grand final that year to the Blues. Jack Lowe. He played for Collingwood between 1912 and 13, before transferring to the Blues in 1914. It was a swap deal for Harry Curtis, who played for the Blues in 1913, then went to Collingwood for the 14 to 23 seasons. Wally Rayleigh. He played for Collingwood between 1913 and 15, before transferring to Carlton after he did his time in the army. Played there between 1920 and 21. Harold Romney. He played for Carlton from 1925 to 26. Well, Blues fans weren't happy about his transfer to Collingwood in 1927. When he went there, he won 4 premierships. He was a part of Collingwood's 5-peat team in the 20s. He even won a couple more in 35 and 36, while Carlton had to wait till 1938 for their next flag. It was a pretty poor period for the Blues at that time. Fred March, Collingwood player in 1924, Blues player in 1926. Jim Shanahan, he went from Collingwood to Carlton in 1927 in a swap deal for Harold Romney. Hector Ross and Bert Everett, they both played at the same time. Carlton from 1928 to 29, and then they moved to Collingwood in 1930. Jim Crow, he was a Blue from 1929 to 1934, but transferred to Collingwood in 1936 and played there until 1937. Les Hewson, he was at the Pies in 27 before going to Fitzroy, Hawthorn and St Kilda. Then he went to the Blues in the 30s. Other players who swapped clubs that around that time, like Norm LeBrun, Ivor Brown, Ken Atkin, Jeff Brokenshire, Harry Sullivan. He played for Carlton in the early 50s and Collingwood in the late 50s. Kevin Burgeon, Ron O'Dwyer, Ray Byrne. He played for Carlton between 1973 and 1978. He then transferred to Collingwood halfway through the 78 season. Played there until 1983. Russell Olsen, he went from Carlton to Collingwood in the 70s. So too did Craig Davis. Who was Nick Davis's dad? He started his career off in Carlton, but his prime years were at Collingwood. Same thing with Peter McKenna. He played for Collingwood for 10 years, between 1965 to 1975, before transferring to Carlton in 1977, after a year off football. Barry Mitchell, Tom Mitchell's dad, dubbed the $1 Million Man in 1993, when he went to Collingwood. And then a year later, he went to their bitter rivals Carlton to play out the rest of his to play out the remainder of his playing days. Mick Mcguan, 10 years at Collingwood, premiership player in 1990, went to the Blues in 1997, did nothing at Carlton. Trent Hotton, sacked by Collingwood in 1996, he went to Carlton in 2000. Heath Scotland, he spent 5 years of his career at Collingwood and spent the next 11 at Carlton. Chris Bryan, Cameron Clark, Jordan Russell, Cameron Wood and Alex Vassallo also swapped clubs in this rivalry. And another notable signing in this one is Dale Thomas. He spent the first 8 years of his life at Collingwood between 2006 and 2013, before departing for Carlton in free agency in 2014, where he played another 100 games. Even though he was pretty good at Carlton towards the back end of his career, while he had injury struggles early on. So in conclusion, Carlton versus Collingwood. It was one of the most hostile rivals that we have seen in the VFL/AFL. And we'll see you in the next video.